here. All right, so we are, I can't remember, what week are we on? 28, 29?
29.
Yep. 2 Kings chapter 3 through chapter 11. And so we are going to start in chapter 3. And did anybody have any questions right off the bat in these early chapters?
Remember where we're at.
We're in chapter 3 of 2
Yeah,
Kings.
three, real quick, the Lord has called these three kings to give them into the hand of Moab.
So Moab stopped giving, what do you call when you're a vassal king? You give a certain amount of money to the king that rules over you, protects you, and you pay him to not attack you, basically a tax. And Moab stopped giving. And so he went to the king of Judah and to ask for help. And the king said he would help. And then there's a third king. I'm trying to remember which king that is. So we got Jehoshaphat, the king of Moab rebelled against me.
The king of Judah.
The king of Judah. Oh, and the king of Edom.
Yep.
Okay. Now the Edomites are the descendants of Esau. So you got Abraham, Isaac's two sons that kind of like didn't have a great relationship, but their descendants had an off and on again relationship, but they were like relatives. So while Edom was never a part of Israel, they still had a kindredship between them. So those three kings, Israel, Judah, and Edom, came together to attack Moab. All right. And when they ran out of water, they believed that God wanted them to do this, and that, but they couldn't find water. And so Elisha, what happened is the king of Judah asked for a prophet. And at that point, the king of Israel, king of Judah, don't know who Elisha is yet. It is a servant that says something about Elisha to them. And so you look at, let me see here. Then one of the king's servants said, Elisha, this is in verse 11. Elisha, the son of Shaphat, is here, who poured water on the hands of Elijah. He was a servant. And Jehoshaphat said, the word of the Lord is with him, because he knew who Elijah was. And the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. And Elisha said to the king, what do I have to do with you? Go to the prophets of your father and the prophets of your mother. So this is the son of Ahab and Jezebel. And obviously, Elisha has no respect for him at all. Like, go to your own prophets. You don't need me. And basically will only speak to them because of Jehoshaphat, who is actually a good king. One of the things I did learn here is like, I've learned a few things, actually quite a bit. I've read through all these Old Testament books. I haven't done a lot of comparison and contrast and fitting in the books of the prophets. It's all somewhat new to me. But on the reading, I focused on Kings because Chronicles seems to be somewhat repetitive and there's a lot more genealogies in there. But I missed something when I put together the reading plan. There's definitely more information about some of these kings in Chronicles, and we may get to some of that if I can find I don't have my notes, so I'll have to try and figure out where this is. But at any rate, you have Kings focuses on all of the kings in Judah and Israel, but it spends way more time focusing on the kings of the northern tribes of Israel than it does Judah. All your descriptions of the Judah kings are pretty small. You got tons devoted to Ahab and interactions with the northern kings with the southern king to draw them in, but it just focuses a lot more on the northern kingdoms. Then Chronicles focuses solely on the kings of Judah. it's following the lineage of the sons of David all the way through to the messianic future. And so it's intent. And Chronicles was written like one of the latest books in the Old Testament, if not the last one. So it's a summary written a long time after the Kings and everything else. They're put together in our Bible, but the Jewish one, it would have been much later towards the end of the Jewish Bible. So at any rate, there's more about Jehoshaphat and stuff like that in Chronicles. I would highly advise you to look at Chronicles and read through that if you want to skip the genealogies, but the stories in there will add more information. And if you do Bible study, you can compare one king to another from Kings and Judah, and you get more information. You get quite a bit more information. So anyway, so they have this battle. They're winning. They actually get water. The Moabites think it's blood and are going to go ahead and raid the armies. They actually find out that's not true and get slaughtered and pull back to the city, which the king of Moab actually sacrifices his oldest son, who is supposed to be the next king, on the wall for a burnt offering. And there came a great wrath against Israel, and they withdrew from him and returned to their own land. So Moab ended up winning its independence, even though they lost that battle, and they were severely weakened. When I looked at some of the commentaries here, they really don't understand that. It may be that the inhabitants of Moab were really invigorated because they felt their God was on their side because they sacrificed the king's son. Such a significant sacrifice would have made them do that. But whatever happens, the two kingdoms of Israel and Judah, three, and Edom back away, and they don't actually continue fighting.
I was going to say, after he offered his son, there came a great wrath against Israel, and they withdrew.
That's what makes it really. It's hard. That's a hard to understand verse that when I was trying to figure it out, like some of it think that it is actually, it's not God's wrath. It's the wrath of the Edomites that fought against them. So they were able to push them back. Why? I don't know. It's recording history. It doesn't always give answers as to why things happen. That's just what happened. So he sacrificed his son. And Shamash, I think, is the god of the Moabites, and so that was a common practice to sacrifice your firstborn. And it's interesting that that's a common practice of the Canaanite gods, is to require a sacrifice of their oldest child. When God actually, when all the Israelites came out of Egypt, he required a sacrifice in place of the firstborn of every one of the Israelites. Because remember, the firstborn of all the Egyptians died, but not the Israelites. And he said, the firstborn is mine, but he doesn't actually require the death of them. He just a replacement or a substitutionary sacrifice for the oldest son in each Israeli tribe. Hello, Jacqueline. So anyway, then we go to chapter 4. And now Elisha is established pretty much as a very reliable prophet in the Old Testament after that. But then you have a bunch of miracles that continue just kind of establishing his abilities, being Elijah's replacement. So he has a woman that actually, let me see here. So a woman that he had taken, that had they don't know who this prophet is, but this woman was married to a prophet and he died and she had creditors, and he basically provided oil to sell to save her from financial ruin. And you have the Shumanite woman, where a woman took care of him whenever he was in the area, built an extra chamber, and then God had given her a son. Later, that son died, and Elisha does the same type of thing as Elijah and raises him from the dead by laying on the body, and almost like mouth to mouth. And it takes him a little bit longer. He does it twice before the boy is risen, but Elijah only once. Then also you see Here in verse 4, you see the beginning, Gehazi, the servant of, this is in verse 25. So she set
25
out,
or what?
of 2 Kings chapter 4.
Okay.
It says she set and came out, came to, hey, Abby, do you know how to turn the volume up on this? Oh, there we go. Thank
There you
you.
go. Hi, Becca.
Get away, you sickies.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
It is very hard to stay away from your sick family members in the house, but anyway, so Elisha comes, anyway, so you see Gehazi here, verse 25 in chapter 4. So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel, and when she saw the man of God, he saw her coming, he said to Gehazi the servant, look, there's the Shunammite, run to meet her and see what's with her. So Gehazi, this is his first appearance here, and later we'll see more of him. And
I thought it was interesting that he asked if everything was okay, and she says everything is all right.
right, but
Yeah.
she's not going to tell anybody except Elisha himself, because she didn't even tell her husband. For whatever reason, she's not going to tell anybody except Elisha. And when she came to the mountain of the man of God, she caught a hold of his feet. And when Gehazi came to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone, for she is in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me, which I think is really interesting. Just that statement itself.
Yeah.
Doesn't give any reason for it, but just the fact that it kind of surprises him that he doesn't even already know what's going on, that God had not already shown him, that Elisha's relationship with God is so amazing that he knows what's going on long before anybody comes to him. And you see this going in Elisha's life. When Gehazi later betrays him, Elisha knows about it. You know, it is like,
Right.
and Gehazi's right here. So Gehazi says, you know, he's right there, sees it, and he says to Gehazi, the Lord has not told me about it. So Gehazi knows how well Elisha can see what's going on. God usually tells him what's going on. And Elisha, and Gehazi thinks he can pull one over on Elisha later. Really dumb. Yeah, really, really dumb. You know, it's like trying to steal from a bank where there's cameras on and waving at the cameras, you know, thinking they can't see you or something, you know, it's just crazy. So anyway, this story comes back up later. We'll get into it, because Gehazi, after he's out of the service of Elisha, starts serving one of the kings of Israel. And we'll get to that later. So Elisha then raises the child from the dead. Then the prophets make a stew that has poison in it, and he cleanses that, then moves on to chapter 5. So is there anything in chapter 4 you guys find interesting or want to talk about?
One thing I found interesting prior was when they put stones in all the fertile land. Did you remember that? It was talked about twice.
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
Is it in Moab? In Moab?
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like everybody dropped a stone and all the good land to like destroy it for future generations forever and ever or something. So
That's not
Yeah.
uncommon.
On every good tree.
What did you say?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cut down every tree. Yeah, they do not want them to survive. When the Romans beat Carthage on North Africa, during the Roman Empire, the North Africa was almost as strong as the Roman Empire. Until when Rome finally subdued Carthage, that established its overall power. But they had to defeat Carthage. When they defeated Carthage, they sowed salt in all of the fertile fields there
Wow.
to make sure they couldn't grow anything.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon that when you defeat somebody, you just.
Yeah, I was thinking though, it said every man would drop it must have been hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah. I mean, they're that are dealing with here, dropping stones in the fields. Like, wow, it was just interesting.
Yeah, I know. It's vindictive for sure. And the thing is that obviously they can still move the stones. If you, I have the place where I hunt actually north of town used to be a nursery. A lot of trees are all planted in rows that are now too big to harvest and everything. But before that, it must have been different farms because there are hedge rows where there's some trees and there's like roots that are part of it that are from old trees they dug up and turned the roots up and they're on their side. And then there's just straight rows of rocks that are just that they harvested out of the field and put in rows there. But now it's just woods. But once upon a time, they were farm fields. So they would have
It wasn't just vindictiveness on the part of the Moab or on the part of Israel. God tells them to do that.
Right,
That's what
right.
Elisha prophesies to them.
Okay, I didn't see that part.
Yeah.
But-
The other thing I thought was interesting with that was that when Elisha is asked to prophesy, which he only agrees to do because Jehoshaphat is there, the first thing he does is he said, "Bring a harpist," and then he has to wait for the harp music to go, and then he can prophesy with the harp music. I thought that was very fascinating that there was like a lubrication of worship to get going or something like that.
I noticed that too. I almost sent that verse to Kristen. But also, if you remember when Saul was anointed king, told him some of the things he would do. And one of them, he would come out and they would say, is Saul among the prophets. Do you remember that story? When he prophesied one time, it's also all those prophets had timbrels and lyres and instruments with them as well. So, and I also find it kind of interesting as you look at David writing all those Psalms, and a lot of them are prophetic, and David being a musician. There's a lot of prophecy there that has to do with music, that comes out with music as well. So what else do you notice? Anything else?
I thought it was interesting the number of women that are coming to Elisha for things versus men. That there's these women keep coming to him and he treats the women very well.
At least two of them. Yeah, I don't know how many. I know there's the one woman with the oil. She's the wife of a prophet who died. And then there's the Shumanite woman. Am I missing any others?
The Humanite. I don't think so, but I mean, that's a fair number of women to appear in us, other than like David, there's not very many women that appear in things.
I think that, well, in these times, especially the first woman, a widow in those ancient times without a man, their life is really in trouble. And especially if they have children that aren't old enough to help work. So you see Ruth and
Naomi,
yeah, they're destitute. They have nothing. They don't have the ability to inherit, to work. No one's going to hire them. They're really in trouble. So I would think that it would be normal for a woman who has nowhere else to go to a prophet for help. I would think. But obviously he treats them well, and I'm thinking I'm glad, that he does. But I didn't.
Think about
really
in
think about that.
comparison, the stories of women coming to Elisha versus the stories of men coming to Elisha. There's a totally different dynamic of how he interacts with them.
Well, the women are asking for a favor and the men are asking for direction. The men are asking, do we attack? Am I going to survive? They want advice. It's interesting. Yeah. Cause like one of the kings, the first son of King Ahab.
Jotham? His name is Joram?
I think it's Joram, and then his brother's Jehoram, I think. Anyway, he sends off for advice about whether he's going to survive. And Elisha says, is there no God in Israel that you can ask of him? Remember? and then he's going to die in his bed, and he has no descendants, so his brother becomes king. But he doesn't ask to be healed. He just asks whether he's going to survive, which is odd. I'd be like, like, come do something for me, right? Until you get to Naaman, and Naaman actually asks to be healed. He asks for a favor, but it's a woman who tells him he can actually do that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it. So, I don't know.
It's also interesting how he feeds hundreds of men on minimal amount of food. He revives somebody from the dead. He's feeding a multitude of people on a minimal amount of food. Who's that remind you of?
Oh, Jesus, yeah. I'm trying to think. Where's the multiple of food
That's the last verse, like verse 42,
Yeah,
42.
4.
42 and
of
43.
what chapter?
4.
Chapter 4.
4.
Got it. Oh yeah, with the stew. Yep, that's true.
We'll go to 43. Yeah, where he did, he had 5 loaves of barley or whatever and grain, and
Right.
had to feed 100
How
men.
can I set this before 100 men?
Yep.
Jesus topped it by 5,900 men. But yeah, that's
No.
I thought of that as well, actually, with Elijah and Elisha. So Elijah, when it comes to the oil and the bread, continually making it through the whole famine, and then the widow who needed oil just keeps pouring until she doesn't need any more. Reminds me of Jesus feeding the 5,000, because he just keeps breaking bread, and there's never less bread than he had started with. Matter of fact, there's more. He has more left over than what they started with. But yeah, these are all acts that Jesus that points to the Messiah's powers and abilities. What else you see? Anything else? All right, chapter 5, Naaman, which I talked about on Sunday, has leprosy. A servant tells his wife he can go to Elisha and be healed, which he goes. He's angry because he isn't treated with respect, but he ends up dunking himself in the river anyway, being healed, and then he's humbled, and he's grateful, and he's generous, and total convert. He becomes a better believer than almost all the Israelites at this point. Just incredible to see that conversion, the picture for me of someone that's converted is supposed to be like the opposite of what they were. It's supposed to be such a significant change that people should notice the difference. And when you read about Naaman's conversion, he's completely different. He's not angry. He's not arrogant. He's humbly saying, forgive me of this one thing when I have to go into the Baal temple of Ramon or whatever and I have to bow with my king, forgive me of this one thing. And before, he was just, I didn't think he needed to be forgiven for anything. He was a commander. The guy should have come out and waved and did something spectacular. He was demanding, and now he's humble, and he's grateful, and he's completely converted. There's no other God in the world except the God of Israel. So anything about Naaman's healing that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I did.
All right. Now here we get into Gehazi. Now also, obviously, at the end of the story, when Naaman is healed, he's willing to give all kinds of payment to Elisha, and he doesn't want payment. And so he goes away, and Gehazi thinks it's foolish. And so he finds a way to sneak away and make up a story about visitors. So give me, 2 sets of clothing and some money, which he does. And let me look here. I wish I had my notes. Oh, so then you get down to verse 25, and he went in and stood before his master Elisha and he said to him, where have you been, Gehazi? And he said, your servant went nowhere. It's like, that's the thing that surprises me in the light of this Shumanite woman. It's like,
Right.
Yeah.
Can you not think this is like a dumb idea here? So, but he said to him, did not my heart go when when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? You see the whole thing. Was it a time to accept money and garments and olive orchards and vineyards and sheep and oxen and male servants and female servants? Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. And he went from his presence a leper like snow. So the penalty is immediate, but he goes away from. Now you find Gehazi come up one more time, and he's serving a king, and he doesn't appear to have leprosy, or he's been able to manage it or something. I don't know, but he is not serving Elisha anymore. So
and what's crazy, kind of crazy, it says it shall cling to you and your descendants forever. Who are his descendants this day?
If he had any, if I would be like, I'm not gonna have any kids.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna have any kids. I don't want to do that to them. It's my fault. My bad. No kids for me. That'd be it. But I don't know. He might have already had kids, and those kids might be going, yeah, we're done. No grandkids for you, Dad. I don't know. So
just curious.
Yeah. So anyway, then they have the axe head in chapter 6 that sinks, and he raises it from the water. Then it was borrowed. What do you find interesting about that miracle right there? So they're like, they swing the axe, it flies off, went in the water, and he cried out, alas, master, it was borrowed. And then the man of God said, where did it fall? And he showed him place, and he cut off a stick and threw it there and made the iron float. And he said, take it up. So he reached his hand and took it. Doesn't seem like a magnificent miracle. And it's like, but what does that strike anybody as odd? Why would this miracle be written about? It doesn't seem that significant.
I don't know if it's just because it is a miracle. That an axe head wouldn't naturally float. So,
Yeah.
I think something about it being borrowed.
That's actually why the guy cares. If it wasn't borrowed, he'd be going like, crud, I got to get a new axe, but it was borrowed.
But
is the penalty pretty bad for losing something you borrowed? Must be.
I think you probably just replace it, but.
Or they could cut off a hand.
I think that for me, it reminds me that there's not anything too small to pray about. That this really isn't seem like that big a deal. You can get another axe. A guy who can call fire down from heaven can produce as much oil as you want and sell it. You can buy a ton of axe heads, right? He can find ways to get the resources to get another axe head to replace it, but instead of replacing it, he raises it it turns into something miraculous. And sometimes I think that in my own prayer life, sometimes things seem too trivial to pray about. And I think there's times in the scriptures that it points to that I don't think that, there's selfish things we shouldn't pray about, but I think there's a difference between selfishness and what we perceive as being trivial. Does that make sense? So I just think God pays attention to the small, trivial details of our lives more than we think he does.
I have a story about that I often tell. When I was doing campus ministry and I was basically living off the Lord, every morning I would wake up and wherever I went, there would be my breakfast. And typically it was always donuts and orange juice. So wherever I went, there was always donuts and orange juice. And I remember one morning I was like, God, I thank you that every morning you give me breakfast, but I'm really sick and tired of donuts and orange juice. What I'd really like is some poppy seed muffins and apple juice. And that morning, the place that I went had poppy seed muffins and apple juice. And so it was always just a random place that I went. It would be like walking into Walmart, and that day they were giving out donuts and orange juice. And in the morning for breakfast. It wasn't like places that there was always food at, but wherever I went in the morning, there was always food there. But that morning there was poppy seed muffins and apple juice, like I had asked for.
Where was that?
That was fine.
Oh, it was when I was working at Michigan State University. I don't remember what place had poppy seed muffins and apple juice. I don't know. Wherever I went that morning.
Bank or something? Okay.
On a poppy
It
seed
could have been a
muffin.
dorm. It could have been an office building. It could have been a church. I have no idea.
You were just too overwhelmed by the muffins to know where you were.
Well, I don't remember, just because, every morning that was my thing. Wherever I went, there was breakfast. So, and I don't remember where I was that particular day.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting. But I think you're right. I just think that we can pray about things that are, kind of seem trivial, but they're not necessarily trivial. I think that'd be super encouraging, if we have that happen. All right, so you have the axe head, then you have the horses and the chariots of fire. I love this story. So this starts in verse 8. Once when the king of Syria was warring against Israel, he took counsel with his servants, saying, at such and such a place shall be my camp. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware that you do not pass this place. The Syrians are going down there. And the king of Israel sent to the place about where the man of God had told him, and thus he used to warn him, and then he saved himself more than once or twice. And the mind of the king of Syria was greatly troubled because of this thing, and he called his servants and said to them, will you not show me who of us is for the king of Israel? So what is the king of Syria thinking here?
there's a spy.
Yeah, there's no way they can know where we are every single time. Thinks there's a spy. One of his servants says, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words you speak in your bedroom. And he said, go and see where he is, that I might seize him. And and it was told him, and behold, he is in Dothan. So he sent horses and chariots and a great army, and they came by night and surrounded the city. Then the servant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out. Behold, an army of horses and chariots were all around that city. And the servant said, alas, my master, what shall we do? Now, who is this servant?
The next servant.
It's not Gehazi. It's not Gehazi. Gehazi is gone. So Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And the Syrians came down against him, and Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, please strike these people with blindness. So he struck them with blindness in accordance with the prayer of Elisha. And Elisha had told them, it said to them, this is not the way, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I'll bring you to the man whom you seek. And he led them to Samaria. As soon as he entered the Samaria, Elisha said, O Lord, open the eyes of these men that they may see. So the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. So now they're trapped. As soon as the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, my father, shall I strike them down? Now, this is a couple of things that are interesting here. Oh, what jumps out at you before I finish? Did you say something, Becca? Oh,
I guess that Elisha took them to the middle of the city.
Yeah, that they're kind of hoodwinked and all of a sudden, boom.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of things here, I think.
There is a lot of things.
I mean, the whole idea of an invisible army that Elisha can see, and he prays to have his servant's eyes open so he can see. Second of all, if you were in the military somewhere right now and you're surrounded and you prayed and you believe that there was armies surrounding you, would they still be in horses and chariots, or would they be in fiery tanks?
Well, in World War II, it was still horses and chariots.
Really?
Yeah, there was lots and lots of soldiers with stories that have seen soldiers on white horses going in, and then the Germans would get confused and whatever, or things would happen.
I
And
have never heard that.
Yeah, there's lots of stories like that.
Really?
Yeah.
It does seem odd that they would choose chariots. They're using the weaponry of the day is what I'm wondering. And so I don't know, is like, would they still, it just seems strange that they would use chariots then. It would, like, they could identify what a chariot was. So let's just say, like, he opened his eyes and he saw millions of angels riding jeeps. He wouldn't know what a jeep was. He couldn't even describe it, you see. So what I'm saying is, it has to be something they can identify what it is. I don't think they need chariots to get around, obviously. They're angels. But to show that they match the power of the enemy, much more so, is what's being seen here. So that's one of the things, is the invisible realm, the realm of beings that God has created that we cannot see are huge in number. And Jesus mentions this, right? Do you guys remember what he said to his disciples before he was going to be crucified? Before he's actually going to be arrested, I think.
I don't know.
I'm going to have to look this up for a second here. Give me a moment. Okay, somebody turn to Matthew chapter 26. And somebody, if you have Google ready, just look up what a Roman legion, how big is a Roman legion? So this is in Matthew chapter 26, verse 53.
50.
Wait a second here. This isn't what's going on here? That's not, what? Oh, I'm in the wrong chapter.
6,000 soldiers.
I was in chapter 27. That's why. So yeah, so 53.
4,000 to 6,000 soldiers.
Jesus, yeah.
So like 72,000 soldiers they're talking about here.
12 legions, yeah,
12 legions.
So anyway, do you not think that I can appeal my foul and immediately send more than 12 legions of angels? So, okay. Yeah, somewhere. So at any rate, I just think that's interesting that there are at our disposal when God wants to give them to us, there's more than enough to overcome any power that would be against us. The whole idea that there are more with us than there are against us is a mindset that we have to remember. But always remember that God's plan isn't always to save us out of every trial. Like when we get to Daniel and the Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, their attitude in front of the fiery furnace says, you can torch us if you want to. God can save us and will save us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow to your God, So the idea is that we obey, not because God's going to rescue us. He can, and he might, but it doesn't change my response in faith to him. You see what I'm saying? So anyway, that's one of the things that's interesting to me about that, the chariots of fire. Then while he opens the eyes of his servant, he blinds all the eyes of the army, the invading army, right? Which I think is interesting too. Just open one guy's eyes to spiritual reality and open the physical reality. These guys can't close their eyes, and then when you open, they're in a new area, but they can't see the spiritual reality. And God's mercy, he doesn't have them slaughtered. He treats them well and sends them back home. Then verse 24, is there any thoughts on that, by the way, before I move on? Okay, then you have afterward, this is verse 24, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, mustered his entire army and went up and besieged Samaria, and there was a great famine. So what he's done, he's surrounded the city. They're starving to death. There's this whole story where these women are going to cannibalize their children. And the king, oh wait, I want to back up. There's one thing right here. Look at verse 22.
What chapter?
This is still chapter 6.
6, yeah, I was just gonna say, I just found it.
Go to verse 21 in chapter 6. As soon as the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, my father, shall I strike them down? Obviously, tremendous respect from the king. This is going to be, I think, King Jehoram towards Elisha. He still doesn't have any real faith in God. He still worships Baals and everything else, but he has way more faith and way more, he's a better man than his father was. He's still not a good king. He still worships the wrong gods and everything else, but he's better than Ahab. But I just think it's interesting how much he cares about Elisha, whereas Elijah was always running for his life and hiding. Elisha lives right in Samaria. He doesn't have a problem living there, or Dothan, and he can walk. Everybody knows where he is, no problem. And he's not afraid of dying. So verse 24, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria. Do you guys remember who Ben-Hadad is?
Isn't he one of the ones that Elijah was told he would be one of the ones to kill the people to anoint him king?
No, he isn't. But what's interesting about Ben-Hadad is the ruler of Syria that invaded, that went to Ahab and said, give us all your wives, all your children and everything. And Ahab refuses, and God says, go attack, I'm going to go and annihilate them. So he does. And then they said, oh, he's not, their God is the God of the mountains. We're going to attack in the plains. The next spring, they go and attack in the spring, and they capture Ben-Hadad. And they said, we have heard that the Israelites are merciful. Let's make them our servants and they won't kill us. And he says, oh, my brother. And he lets him continue being king of Syria.
Yep.
And,
That's right.
and then Elijah says, because you have released the life of one I am deemed worthy to kill, it's your life for his life. So Ahab dies because he saved this guy's life. But this guy continues to be a problem for Israel. He should have died. So it's not just that, the price was just that it cost Ahab his life. It also costs, the lives of probably thousands of other Israelites. And they're starving to death because of them. All right. And so anyway, then you find out what happens. Oh, now this is the king is actually mad at Elisha. So the change is really quick. So he's mad at Elisha at this point. Elisha was sitting in his house and the elders were sitting with him, and the king had dispatched a man from his presence. And but before the message arrived, Elisha said to the elders, do you see this murderer has come to take off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold the door fast against him. Is it not the sound of his master's feet coming behind him? So right now, so the attitude of the king changed from my father, should I kill all these people, to, now I'm going to kill you at any rate, but he still knows where he lives. And while they were still speaking to them, a messenger came down to him and said, this trouble is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? I have no idea what that statement means. I could not figure it out.
We're in 33.
This is verse 33. This trouble is from the Lord. That's what the messenger says. But then in chapter 7, it says, Elisha said, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time, a seah of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. So all this food that's so expensive, all of a sudden supposed to be cheap. And this guy, the captain of the on whose hand the king leaned, said to the man of God, if the Lord himself should make the windows of heaven, could this thing be? But he said, you shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall eat none of it. And then what happens in the story is you've got let me see, I don't remember exactly what happened here, but was they afraid, were they attacked somewhere else and left, or they ran? I can't remember.
I thought he got attacked at the gates and was killed, so he never partook of it.
He
Never ate
did.
it.
Why did the Syrians leave? Why did the Syrians leave?
First. Interest of the gate.
Verse 6. Here it is again. For the Lord had made an army of the Syrians. Hear the sound of chariots and horses and the sound of a great army. And they said to one another, behold, the king of Israel has hired against us, and the king of Hittites and the kings of Egypt to come against us. So they fled away in the twilight and abandoned their tents and horses and their donkeys, leaving the camp as it was. They fled for their lives. So they left all their stuff there because they heard actually probably those same chariots that Elisha opened the eyes earlier to see his servant. And so they just went running. The lepers came and found everything that's there. Then they told the city. They sent out some messengers, say, yep, it's true. The Syrians aren't setting an ambush here. And then the whole city ran out to get food. And the guy who didn't believe the prophet was trampled to death. So he did see it, but he didn't get to eat any of it because he didn't believe. Seems rather harsh, but that's what happened. Any thoughts on chapter 7?
You know, I think there are certain times where there is such a amount of miracles taking place, or such a spirit of the Lord, that there is greater accountability for what you believe or what you don't believe, what you do, what you don't do, you know. And I think that Elisha having this, you know, a archetype of the Spirit of Christ on him was one of those times. So the punishments are harsher during that time period than they would be, you know, later on.
So does anybody think of other, I think that's a good point. Is there any other illustrations in the Bible that we see that actually happen?
I mean, I think of Ananias and Sapphira.
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
So when we get
Or
to the
during the time of Moses, you know, I mean, those are times where there's like this incredible set of miracles and relationship with God going on. And yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ananias and Sapphira would be a couple that were put to death, you know, not by people. God killed them. And then you see unbelief is quite a problem when a ton of miracles are happening at an age when they are, you know. So I think you're right. So chapter 8, the Shumanites' lands restored. So this is interesting because here's where Gehazi comes up again. So now he's serving the king. Now Elisha has said to the woman whose son had been restored to life, arise and depart with your household and sojourn wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and it will come upon the land for 7 years. So there's a long famine. So she leaves and she stays in the land of the Philistines. So this is down south of Israel, even with Judah, but out on the Mediterranean coast. She's staying with the Philippines. And so after a time of 7 years, so verse 3, at the end of the 7 years, when the woman returned to the land of from the land of the Philistines, she went to appeal to the king for her house and land. Now the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, tell me the great things that Elisha has done. And while he was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life. Behold, the woman whose son had restored to life appealed to the king for a house and land. And Gehazi said, my lord, O king, here is the woman. What are the odds? It's like, wow, that's pretty perfect timing. And obviously, he wants to hear the story. Now, Gehazi, I think this is just where he's gotten a job now. He's been able to work for the king, even though he has leprosy, if he still has it. It's going to cling to him unless he repented and God removed it and they didn't write about it. I don't know. But at any rate, he's working for the king. And so the king appointed an official to her, saying, restore all that was hers with the produce of the field from the day she left until now. So not only did she get her land, she got everything that the land produced for 7 years, which probably wasn't a lot during a famine, but something, All right. Sometimes it's like none of the kings of Israel are good. 20 kings in Israel, all of them are bad. Not a single good one. 19 kings of Judah in this time period from the time they split. There's 19 kings of Judah and 1 queen. All right. And only 8 are good. It's better than the northern tribes of Israel, but none of them are good in Israel. And no matter how far we see this, it always happens. Now, we drop down to verse 7 in chapter 8. This is where we get to what you were saying earlier, Jacqueline. Now, Elisha came to Damascus. Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, was sick. And what is told him, the man of God has come here. The king said to Hazael, take a present with you and go to meet the man of God and inquire of the Lord through him, saying, shall I recover from the sickness? So here it is, a guy asking if he's going to recover again, not ask if he can be healed, right? So Hazael went to meet him and took a present with him and the all kinds of goods in Damascus, camels of 40 camel loads. And when he came and stood before him, your son Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, sent a message, sent me to you, saying, shall I recover from this sickness? And Elisha said to him, go, say to him, you shall certainly recover, but the Lord has shown me that he will certainly die. And he fixed his gaze and stared at him until he was embarrassed, and the man of God wept. And Hazael said, why does my Lord weep? He answered, because I know the evil that you will do to the people of Israel. You will set on fire their fortresses, and you will kill their young men and with a sword, and dash to pieces their little ones, and rip open their pregnant women. And Hazael said, what is your servant, who is but a dog, that he should do this great thing? Great thing. Elisha answered, the Lord has shown me that you are to be the king over Syria. Now, Hazael, if you look, probably the first mention of his name, Hazael, in my Bible, there's a W next to it. So I look at that W. I would have this in my notes, but I don't have my notes with me now. This is verse 7. Oh, so go to 1 Kings chapter 20. Okay. So 1 Kings chapter 20. Let me see, I think that's where it's going to be.
No, it's in 19, I think what you're looking for. 19 verse
Okay, yep.
15.
Okay, there you go.
15.
Yeah.
That was close.
Well, I have it in my notes, but I also like the print of this Bible is pretty small. I don't have my glasses on. So he says, and the Lord said to him, go return your way and you to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be the king over Syria. Yeah. This is quite a bit in advance. So I don't think he ever anointed him. It is like through Elisha that he actually gets not an actual anointing, but is called to be king of Syria through Elisha, not through Elijah. All right. And then he says, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, also anoint king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, you shall anoint as a prophet in your place. So keep your finger there because he's going to anoint Jehu here pretty soon as well. So Hazael becomes king, and he assassinates Ben-Hadad and becomes king, and he does ravage Israel. All right. Then in verse 16, in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, the king of Israel, when Jehoshaphat was a young king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. And he was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. Oh, this is, let me see here. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and the house of Ahab had done, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife. That's important, okay? Because that woman is going to become queen of Israel. Ahab's daughter is married to Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he gets Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, begins his reign, and he begins to institute Baal worship in Jerusalem because of Ahab's daughter, who's his wife. And so Edom revolts against the rule of Judah. Yeah, let me see here. So Jehoram dies. So in the days, let me see here. Surrounded him, but his army fled home.
Rose by night.
It doesn't say that he died in that battle, but Edom revolted. At any rate, but he dies. And let me see here.
Who, Joram?
Yeah.
Yeah, passed over to Zer with all his chariots and rose by night. His chariot commander struck the Edomites that surrounded him, but his army fled.
Just says he slept with his father and was buried in his father in the city of David, but it didn't say how he died. But Ahaziah reigns in his place. Okay. Now what's going to be important here is that that once Ahaziah becomes king, he's evil too, because his grandfather is Ahab. All right. And his mother's name was Athaliah, okay? She was the granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel. Now, Omri was the father of Ahab. So, and so Ahab had a daughter named Athaliah, all right? And that was the wife of Jehoram. If you can keep it straight, you've got Jehoram's married to Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab. And then so now she's the mother of the new king. Okay. And so now what he does is evil in the eyes of the Lord. And he went, and so then in verse 28 it says he went with Joram to the son of Ahab to make war against Hazael, king of Syria. And the Syrians wound him, and King Joram returned to be healed in Jezreel. The wound Syria had given him at Ramah, where he fought against Hazael, king of Syria. And Ahaziah, Jehoram, went down to see Jehoram. So what happens is because Jehoram's wounded by Hazael, Ahaziah goes to see his uncle, okay? And he's visiting. And then in chapter 9, Jehu now is anointed by Elisha to be king of Israel, and he assassinates the king and all his sons and all his relatives of just demolishes all of the descendants of Ahab and Jezebel. So it's all his 70 sons, all their friends, everybody. So it's a coup, right? And so, but let me see here. Chapter 9, verse 1, Elisha the prophet calls the sons of the prophets and said to him, tie up your garments and take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when you arrive, look up there for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, and you shall in him rise among his fellows and lead him to the inner chamber. Then take the flask, pour the oil on his head, and says, thus saith Lord, I anoint you Lord King over Israel. Open the door and flee. Do not linger. And then he begins to annihilate all of Ahab's descendants. But he also destroys Ahaziah. And Ahaziah, being dead, his mother kills all of the others that are going to should have rose to the throne in Judah and becomes queen by murdering all of her sons and all the other relatives of the Judah kings. Okay, one escapes and is hidden as a baby in the temple. Did you guys read all that? So this is like really wild stuff, right? So now Yehu, go back to that chapter 19, where verse 15 again, or 16.
It's way up there.
1 Kings chapter 19. And verse 16 says, and Yehu the son of Nimshi will anoint king over Israel. Elisha is the one who does that. So all three of those things actually come to pass. Two of them there. Elisha is the only one that happens immediately. You guys see it?
Yep.
Okay. So now the story just keeps weaving. So now Yehu just destroys everybody, but what he doesn't do is he doesn't cause Israel to worship God only. He wants them to worship God, but he wants to do it in those two pagan places that the very first king set up of Israel, in Dan and in Samaria, where they worship the golden calves. And that's his downfall. And it's going to be his kingdom isn't going to last either. And then you just have coup after coup after coup because of it. So, but in verse 14 and continuing, that's where Yehu assassinates Ahaziah. All right. And then Yehu executes Jezebel. Oh, what's interesting too is where Yehu assassinates Ahab's son Jehoram is in look at verse, I wish I had my notes here, but verse 21, chapter 9, verse 21.
Yep.
Joram said, make ready, and they made their ready their chariots, and Joram, king of Israel, Uzziah, king of Judah, set out in each in his own chariot. They went to meet Yehu and met at the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. Do you guys remember who that is?
Yeah, that's the vineyard you wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That he wanted to turn into a garden. And Elijah said, your descendants will die on this property. You just buried your own children. And this is where they actually die. And then they go back and kill Jezebel. The prophecy about her is that the dogs will clean her up. She will not get buried. And that actually happens too. Even though they intend to bury her, she doesn't get buried. So all these prophecies come true much later, but they do come true. If you don't keep track of them, you won't see, even though it tells you it, but some of them you won't see that it actually happens. So anyway, then chapter 10, it just goes through and talks about the slaughter of all of Ahab's descendants.
He slaughtered Ahab's descendants.
Yeah, he just slaughters them all and removes
Uh-oh. He froze.
Did we lose him?
He froze. We were doing so good.
Yeah.
all the Baals.
There he is. Kinda. Was. What? I heard something for a minute.
Yeah, I think we lost him totally.
He's getting back on. He just disconnected
There
for
he
a
is.
second. So he'll be back in a second.
We see him, but we
Now
don't
he
hear
needs
him.
voice.
He's got to unmute himself.
Yeah.
There he goes.
Muted now, but I can't figure out how to get me. There we go. Yeah, that was weird. It just stopped. I mean, it just shut down. There was like nothing there. I'm like, technology and me do not get along.
Kind of like Sunday service, huh?
I'm still frustrated about Sunday. Anyway, look at chapter 10, verse 28. It says that Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. So he wiped out all the worshipers, all the priests, everything. But 29 says, but Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin. That is, the golden calves were in Bethel and Dan. And because the Lord.
Oh, no. Not again. Yep.
Yep, he ain't moving. He's frozen.
Well, Becca, are you the one that's up in Bay City?
Yeah, I just moved 2 months ago.
That's what I thought. How you feeling? I heard you were a little under the weather also.
Yeah, I think COVID. But I was doing really bad for a second there. I got really bad fevers and everything. I couldn't sleep or anything during night. So, but I'm feeling a lot better now. I slept, like I said, I've slept 14 hours the other day, and that really felt so good.
Back again.
Who's that?
Welcome.
I don't know what's going on here, but anyway,
How many people in your family are on Wi-Fi right now?
it shouldn't be very many, and ours is fast. It's like over 200 MIPS. I don't understand what's going on. So it's really frustrating, but at any rate, going back here, chapter 10, verse 29 says, it talks about he did everything except for they continue to worship at Bethel and Dan, which is what he doesn't actually cause Israel to turn back to the Lord. And he's not that great a king, even though he's far better than Ahab or any other kings. So anyway, that's that. Then chapter 11, and I think this is the last chapter we go through. This is Athaliah. Remember, the mother of Ahaziah, who's also the daughter of Ahab. She ends up, so when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, he was killed by Jehu, the king of Israel. And he killed him because Ahaziah was a Baal worshiper as well. And so he killed all.
Okay.
All of the Baal worshipers, all the Baal priests, thus they hid from Athaliah and was not put to death. Looks like did I lose you guys again?
Yeah.
Chris Smith,
You did for a minute.
Oh, okay. We're gonna try and finish this up quick. So anyway, then it says in the 7th year, but 7 years later, she's queen for 7 years. And she's still trying to instill Baal worship and everything in Israel. But in the temple, the child is hidden. And women weren't allowed in parts of the temple.
Nope, guess not.
He must have neighbors stealing his internet. Everybody's hijacking him.
Maybe he's using Dominion.
Yeah, he might be using Dominion software.
So they could have hidden the boy.
Oh,
Unmute yourself. Unmute.
There we go. Okay. All right. Anyway, what I was saying when I got rudely interrupted again by technology is that it would be easy to hide a child in the temple from a woman because there were certain places in the temple women were not allowed to go. So they could hide a child in there for 7 years. So 7 years later, she is put to death. And then now because of this, actually, and it's probably a good thing that she destroyed all the other kings and allowed a child to be raised in the temple, because it sets Israel, Judah up to have a good king again, a king that actually is going to work with the Lord. It's weird how God uses evil for good. So he takes this woman, wipes out all the sons of Ahaziah that very well could have also been worshipers of Baal and kept leading Judah in the same path of Israel. But because she just
Man.
Looks like he's doing selfies in these different.
He's got something going on there. This is amazing. None of the rest of us have broke it up.
Yeah.
destroyed all of them and one is put in the temple.
Okay.
I see a kitten tail, Becca.
Let's just finish up this
Okay.
part in a week. Just ridiculous. So I'm just going to say goodbye to you guys. And we're behind. All right. Let's pray. I'll talk to you later. Gone. I'm done. Yes. Okay. Am I still here?